So this is the first day of Lent. So I'm going to be serious. I'm not going to make this up. I'm really telling the truth because it's the first day of Lent. I was leaving Francis Heights months ago, and yet it was still bitter cold months ago. Francis Heights, this amazing assisted living center on, I think, 26th and Mead, not far from here. And there was a man who I remember, he didn't actually have it on, but I remember somehow him as if he'd had this golden turban wrapped around his head. And the rest of his clothes I remember as being pretty ragged. And he was moving in the direction of Colfax. But what I'm not making up is that I overheard him say to this kind of ordinary woman, God didn't know her, interrupted her walking by saying, clearly, God made you on a Sunday after a good night's sleep. Really? Has anyone heard that before? God made you on a Sunday after a good night's sleep. And then he went on to say, other people you can see God made when God was tired, God made on a Tuesday, God made late on a Thursday afternoon, but you, Sunday. Isn't that fabulous? If you want to use that, please do. I don't think he'd heard it before. I think it was clearly an inspiration of the moment, maybe. But that's the word of the day, that God made you on a Sunday, or a Saturday, or whatever was the most restful, wonderful day of the week to create. God made you. You know, there's the Hebrew, that the Old Testament was written first in Hebrew, right? Are there any Hebrew scholars in the house? So I don't think I'm making this up. I think I'm remembering correctly that in the beginning, when God made the heavens and the earth, and then when we come to this part of the story that we heard, the Hebrew word for what God formed, the earth, the Hebrew word for earth is Adamah. And the human being, the Hebrew word is Adam. Does that sound familiar? We translate it to Adam, made out of Adamah. God created human beings, maybe on a Sunday, maybe on a Thursday, maybe in the billionth of whatever eternity is. But God made the human being out of earth and called it good, and called it Sunday making. Sunday made. Good enough to be good billions of years later by two strangers passing each other, walking out of a building on their way to Colfax. God made you out of earth and called it good. In one of the Psalms, there's the expression, the land of the living land, the living land. So if we're here today, this Ash Wednesday, to say we are that Adam, we are formed out of the Adamah, we are the earth formed out of earth, we're literally dust of the ground, molded and fashioned into everything that we are. Are we alive? Is the land of us living land? Is that a question for this journey of Lent? Okay, I'm dust. Do I have the breath of life moving in me in ways that cause me to feel the joy of the glory of God, to feel the aliveness and the justice and the peace and the reign of God in my life? Is the land living? And if it's not, how extraordinary to be wrapped up in a season, this being the first day of the 40 days of the season, where God invites us into practices of aliveness. So if your land is not living, if the dust is not feeling that breath of God coursing through it, enlivening all of the particles, then this is the glorious time of taking on practices of aliveness. And I can see some of you already have given up caffeine today. How do you feel? Alive? What amazing practices we've kind of just taken on over the years. How about the practice of Sabbath? How about the practice, Christians tend to think of Sunday as the Sabbath, but Saturday is the Sabbath, or Thursday afternoon, or whenever. The Sabbath might be a time outside of time to not think about work, to not talk about anything but love and relationship and God. And if God doesn't quite make sense to you right now about what matters in life, what's at the heart of it all, that kind of Sabbath. What about that kind of practice to recover the living inside of the land of you? One of the practices we're about to experience is this call and response with the ashes. So you're going to hear the call out to you. Remember, you are dust. And your call back can be, and God is forming me. Remember, you are dust, and God is forming me. If your land is not living, if the dust of you just hasn't felt alive, just kind of scattered, what if a spiritual practice to recover aliveness these 40 days could be, God, I'm dust, form me. When your thoughts go to busy preoccupation and worry, God, I'm dust. And rut the thoughts, I'm dust. God, form me, form me. There was this church, and I'm not making this up. I wish I was. And it kind of identified as middle class. Where did that laughter come from? Oh. It identified as this upper middle class. 50% Democrat. It was 50% Republican, kind of divided. Therefore, nobody talked about what really mattered. They just didn't make waves. And so there wasn't much interaction on a Sunday morning. Not much mixing of the dust, right? And there was this family who came in. They drove all the way from, they probably drove 20 miles just to come to this church. And I don't know why. Because when they got there, and every other time they were there, it was the struggle to fit in. So he was the second generation, is that how you describe it? His grandparents were immigrants from Hungary. And they'd struggled to make it financially through each of the generations, and his family was no exception. He was a carpenter and struggled every month just to pay the basic bills. And he had these crystal blue eyes, kind of rugged guy, and his wife, similarly, rugged woman, crystal blue eyes. They'd been married before, had older kids, but they were so in love with each other that I think even in their late 40s they had children together. And so they bring these kind of ragtag kids in, and they sit in the front row, and they never make another friend in that congregation because they don't fit, because they don't somehow talk the same talk or speak the same speak. That that division of class and finance and status just was never bridged by anybody in the other direction. We have this communal land. Jesus said to all of the people who came to listen to him, I think 90% of the masses of people had been kicked off their land by the Roman Empire. So Jesus says to landless people who maybe had land for generations back, no land now, trying to make any kind of end meet in these cities. Jesus says to the landless ones, the kingdom of heaven is yours. And it's not just yours in the life to come, it's yours now, and in fact, it is in you. The kingdom of heaven is in you. He said to this whole collective of people, these masses of people, where's the land? It's right here. It's in you right now. Imagine if this church that eventually pushed this couple and their kids so far to the margins that they didn't come anymore. We can be back to all being the same, or not talking about, or not exposing how different we are. Imagine if that collective land could have stood in a big circle surrounding the sanctuary and prayed out loud, God, we are dust. We are dust. Form us, not just into living land, but into the kingdom land. God, we are dust. Reform us as you would form your justice on this great big planet of Earth, inside of your great big movement of people on Earth, inside of your people who are the living land, that we might be the living land, that we might be the kingdom on Earth as it is in heaven. So let's call and respond and take on one practice in the midst of so many to allow God to restore aliveness to the land individually and together worldwide that God has made us to be. So we come and pray on these ashes and then invite you to come up for this call and response.